All right. Thank you all for coming here. My name is Sharad Joshi, and I'm an associate professor in the Non-Proliferation and Terrorism Studies program here at the Middlebury Institute. And Happy New Year to everyone. Today, we've got a very distinguished guest who's a good friend of the Institute and several of us. One of the most distinguished scholars in the field of international relations today, Dr. T.V. Paul of McGill University. He, amongst, I could go through his whole, CV, which I won't. I will say two things. One being that on a personal level, he's also from Jawaharlal Nehru University. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Where I met Bill Potter once.
Right. And TV's association with a number of our very distinguished faculty goes back many decades, especially Dr. Potter, and of course, Jeff Knopf. So, TV has written some incredible books on international relations theory, balance of power politics, nuclear non-proliferation issues, and of course, South Asia. You're one of the most prolific scholars I know, I have to say. And we're very glad that every time he has a new book out, he always comes to the Institute. And it makes for a great discussion. He's also been president of the International Studies Association, which I also want to mention. But in today's conversation, he's going to be talking about his latest book project, which is in front of you on the screen there, about Indian foreign policy and India's quest for major power status, which is such an important international relations question these days, with partnerships like the Quad, as well as with the recent crises between India and China, as well as India's involvement and postures on some really important international relations issues recently, including the war in Ukraine. So you've got all of these different projects, different issue areas in the international system, and it's really interesting to see what India's position constraints are when it comes to these matters. So I'm going to shut up now, and I'm going to give the floor over to Dr. Paul, and for about 35, 40 minutes, and then I'm sure it'll be a lively discussion. So
thank you, Sharad. It's like homecoming, because I lived here for about 8 months in 2002, 2003 as a colleague of Jeff at NPS. And I was also an affiliated fellow here. And those were some of the best months, although my wife had to stay back for various family job reasons. Then McGill gave me a chair and pulled me back to winter wonderland. So I'm enjoying this visit. We have a winter just started there late this year. But it is tremendously an honor to be the first talk of this book. Actually, I have several places, including LSE and London School, King's College, and all are planning, but maybe in May. So I also want to acknowledge my first employer. That is, many of you are probably working with Bill Potter. I was a graduate student at UCLA when he was starting the non-proliferation project. So I was his TA/RA for a course he taught on American foreign policy. Learned a lot from him, and we have kept in touch all these years. We're Facebook friends and know families, what's going on, at least in that sense. But it's always great to be back. Right. So this book took me a while. It was written while I was writing during the COVID period, and then the Oxford people kept on postponing the publication. And now the Indian elections are coming out, are happening in May. So they said, this is the time. We may get a 2 weeks attention, that's it. So I'm trying to push this. The copy editing is all done. The galleys are in the process of printing, so hopefully by April it will be there. This is also related to my long-term interest on status, international status. Deborah Larson, myself, and Bill Wolford did an edited volume titled Status in World Politics. If you haven't seen it, it's a Cambridge volume, which has done quite well, I must say, citation-wise, and a number of works that younger people are working on this subject. So the book is written for a middle range audience in terms of the public too, because as Sharad said, status now is not just international for India, it's internal. There is a lot of things going on. You may know Prime Minister Modi is using status improvement or his claim for increasing his electoral support. And he is blaming Nehru and Congress Party or others for not bringing India the status it deserves. So this is a big topic. They don't call status, but it is the underlying theme. So it has an enormous resonance, and in the context of rising powers, the issue of status is becoming a lot more important. So for about 5 decades after independence, India was in the what you call aspirational power mode. But the first decades of 2000s, it has got elevated to what you call the rising power category. And rising power category as those states that have the potential, aspiration, and the determination to get there. Of course, they are constrained, but they are eventually have the possibilities to be great powers. But it all started with India's economic liberalization, and then the United States accepting India as a de facto nuclear state, topic that you're interested, and the nuclear accord under Bush administration. But the GDP growth rate has been one big part, economic growth rate. Now India is the 5th largest economy of the world in nominal dollar terms, but 3rd largest in power, purchasing power parity terms. So by 2030, it will potentially become number 3. And by 2050, number 2, overtaking the United States. That's kind of predictions sometimes are very problematic. You will see. But I want to bring the status literature that is very important. The thing is that Indians and others are writing about India rarely understand why this desire for status, higher status in international politics. And even when a country does not have such attributes as it did not have, why did it seek this status? These are some big puzzles in the book. I have a lot of discussions about the Indian aspirations. As 1947, the per capita income was $300. And India was one of the poorest, it's still the poorest in many parts. And so this question often arises, what is status, how it is ascribed, attributed, desired. So a definition that I'm using is from our edited volume that Deborah Larson and all I did, the one collective beliefs about a country's valued attributes, placing in a strata in a hierarchical order. In other words, assuming a hierarchical order, a country is attributed certain status, a certain placement, and it is actually in the perceptions of others. It is not that I can say I have status, but unless you people agree that this guy has status, I will not be recognized as a status holder. This is a problem for countries too, and India actually, very interestingly, that's a problem. The perceptions of others, like beauty, is in your eyes, not in what the person thinks he or she may have. So this definition is putting certain challenges because it's not clear when you can say a country has higher status in the international system. But we all know that some countries do have institutionalized status, and that is what we call the great powers of the day. Great power status determined at the end of 1945, World War II in San Francisco. Let's put it at the P5 members. So that also is a big question mark. Who is a great power? The whole idea of great power, is it really a good term? Is it going to be here forever? Is it a very European era concept? And so great power is the one power to hurt, power to deprive, power to provide or deny security to others, holding structural power. And in these days, there is a notion of comprehensive national power, which has got several elements. You need hard power, soft power. You need both material and other attributes. And the fact that a great power is also an institutionalized power holder, and it is not easy to institutionalize oneself as a great power. And so this is a big challenge, about transition problem. When do you get accepted? And when a country reaches certain material threshold, its elite may be tempted to push hard. And there is a whole literature on social identity, what sort of strategies they use. Some are based on non-violent strategies. But in history, as you know, there has been a lot of violent strategies to push hard, produce. Partly because the established status holders don't want to give away their power. Status is not something that it can become zero-sum, and fear that you lose, you give someone status. Okay, so why do we need status? I mean, some people say, actually, I've seen the Indians themselves often talk about, this is a waste of your effort. Why do you want to get the recognition that others? Yeah, but it is a big problem in human psychology. We are craving for deference, respect, and it is a collective self-esteem of a nation state. And if you have the threshold capabilities, if you think you are there, if you don't get it, that creates discrepancies and psychological issues for the nation state. So there is a major psychological benefit, collective self-esteem. But there are material benefits which often people forget to mention. A status holder, high status holder, benefits a lot of stuff. It has opportunities to shape others' policies. The United States has the opportunity to shape the policies of many countries. It can shape international trade, international organizations. It can do a lot of things. So status is not without material benefits. And the destinies of other countries will be determined by the higher status holder. So those are kind of material, less nuanced in some sense. But I think we need to look at certain notions about moral conceptions. And here I think the idea of a country's history is very important. And today's Hindutva, or the Hindu nationalists, argue that for 1,000 years, India has been humiliated. It has been one of the most continuing civilizations. And the humiliations, the first was 800 years of Islamic conquest, continuous conquest. Then 200 years of Western Christian conquest. So very much Abrahamic religions destroyed the Indianness, Indian culture, civilization. Of course, there's a lot of resistance to that. But the point is that this, in China, the 100 years humiliation, big topic of Western humiliation. But the RSS wants to get out of this. They call India for Indians, I think it's Hindus. Others came, or others were converted forcibly. And these are foreign religions. Very problematic assertion, because Hinduism itself is a Central Asian religion. You may not disagree with me. I'm one of the people who keep saying that Hindu ideas came from Central Asia. Aryans brought them to India. And original Indian, North Indian people were the Dravidians who live in South today, Tamil Nadu and places like that. And these people conquered the so-called Aryans conquered just like we blame the other conquerors. So this is a story of conquest over the last, I don't know how many, 5,000 years. So then the idea that this humiliation will be rectified, it has to be recognized as a Hindu nation. And that is what the Hindutva movement is after. And that those minorities, Muslims are 14%, Christians are 2.5%. 2% Sikhs who are in between Muslim and Hindu. Then there are slightly over 1% Buddhist, there are all kinds of groups. So these are all, as long as the religions, Buddhism, they don't mind because it came out of Hinduism. Even Sikhism up to a point, but the Sikhs have great problem with this conception of nation state. So the civilizational base is a big part of it, but that civilizational base varies according to whom you talk to. If you talk to the Hindutva fellow, it's a Hindu civilization, whereas if you talk to the Nehruvians and the secular forces, they say this is a very eclectic religion, country. It has brought so much, mixed ideas. It has never been a pure, because even in Hinduism, there's no single Hinduism. There are thousands of gods, thousands of castes, communities, and so it's a melting pot of different ideas and values. You cannot just put one notion based on a very confrontational Hinduism. So this aspect is now very important. And even Nehru used civilization in a very different manner. In fact, if you ever get to read one book on India, that is a book called Discovery of India by Jawaharlal Nehru, first Prime Minister, a very critical assessment for a politician. And is a book that will tell you in his own words that these are the problems, that we messed it up. So, in fact, there is a very interesting recent book I was a reviewer called The Fallen People. That is worth reading that too. So perceptions and misperceptions, what others think of you, how others value, you can misperceive. And you see that a lot in Modi's behavior today. And he thinks that the world has accepted India, or he means his group of political elite, and BJP. Partly because the diaspora that lives in cities, countries like USA and Canada and all, a large number of them are very sympathetic to this idea of Hindutva. And they think that because they are very active in social media, and Modi has become the #1 most popular leader in the world in all kinds of social media platforms. So this really gives an impression that, something is happening. So there is a problem of misperception, and whether you have reached certain thresholds and whether you can claim to be there. But there are some things they have reached. That is what I will discuss. I'm much more fair on this subject than critics in India. Many of them, the left-leaning people, are not at all happy what is going on. But I am sympathetic to the problem of status, but I'm not sympathetic, of course, to the Hindutva conception of status. And so this is a big topic in IR, as you know, this status discrepancies, power transition conflicts. Most recent book of Graham Allison talk about the Thucydides trap. And so the other problem is status is also sometimes can generate a lot of violence. Putin's war is, a lot of other reasons, including his personality. He is a great example of his expected status not fulfilling. And the challenge coming from the countries nearby, the near abroad, or his former republics, that he thought were out of his sphere of influence. So, typical great power, sphere of influence. If Ukraine is not going to be with us, punish them. And then there is a lot of hostility to the West for either not accepting the Gorbachev deal as correct. And so there is a lot of problem in status in the world today. And China and Russia are trying to gain their status through various mechanisms. Some through more violence, others through coercive strategies, others through Belt and Road Initiative, that's a status scheme, which is again, we can talk about. So established groups often are elected, that we know, new members don't get there. One other problem is editing of the attributes that give status in history books, or magnifying those status points. So history books in India are being rewritten today, very much editing out all the Mughal period, which, Taj Mahal built by the Mughal, highlighting only the Hindu rulers and their achievements, This is not just India. By the way, I think your US history books also do that. Editing is a big part of social groups. Every country read history books, textbooks, they project. I live in a place called Quebec, which has got, my daughter is going to school there. History is all about Quebec's humiliation by the English Canada. It's quite funny, and very little about the English Canada or the rest of the world. So, but college level, of course, everybody gets to take courses. So there is other problem is shocks. Sometimes leaders can come to power with this great aspiration. In my lifetime, I got to get there. That, I think, is what Mr. Putin and Mr. Xi Jinping and Mr. Modi are all trying to get there. You need to get there with your finite lifetime. You got to do things. It's a big problem. Okay, this much of the book, I had to cut out a lot of theories because my publisher said, if you want to sell, you'll put people to sleep the moment you talk IR theories. But then I thought, okay, if I don't put some, what is going to be my contribution? So I did have one chapter, but the rest is all about India. Okay, India status markers. So now we are talking about serious stuff in terms of material power, military, the fourth firepower, third largest army, all that, divided in two theaters, Pakistan, China, and with an increasing navy, which is the Indian Ocean. That is what is probably potentially going to give a lot more position. And then economy is the number one thing that people consider India as this potential power, because in October 2022, it hit 3.5 trillion dollars, making it the fifth largest economy, overtaking the former colonial power Britain, which was a big psychological thing. Britain is weaker than India today. And by the way, people don't realize the company that ruled India, East India Company, is owned by an Indian. East India Company still exists. I'm not talking about just the road lines and all that. They have all this stuff they sell all over. But I don't know. It is a small company. It was the second multinational corporation after the Dutch East India Company. All right. Now, so this is the future. If the way it's growing some 6%, 7%, question mark there too. By 2030, as I mentioned, third largest economy, 2050, most likely second largest after China. And so this is like going back to history. 1850, 26% of world economy, whatever we know, was China, was India. 32% or something was China. These two had enormous economic weight until the Europeans came and conquered and destroyed all the local capacity. The Silk Road vanished, whatever. So they are saying it's just going back to history, basically. You know, it's for hundreds of years, Asia Pacific was the hub of world production, world capacity, like the economy. So economic capacity is big deal. There are big problems there. I will come to that in a minute, because you have the highest inequality in any rising power in any historical periods. That's India. You have what percentage of the population holding 1% of the population, that's the billionaires, holding some 42% of the national wealth, total 10% of the population, upstate population, holding 57%. And the bottom 30% or 40% holding 2% of the economy. So it's a very unequal problem. And per capita income as a result is very low. But also per capita income from south versus north. In some states of India, per capita income is higher than some other somewhat developed countries. So it's amazing. Cities like Bangalore, it has per capita income much higher. And so this discrepancies, these disparities is a big problem. But when you look at the national total, it is an emerging economy and it has a huge market. Even though it is messy, it is where all the companies think they can sell their product, including Apple and all these others. So that part is probably what is people are more interested. But then there is demographic dividend, which is basically it has the most working age population for the next 15, 20 years is 16 or 20, say 18 to 35 working population. Again, question mark how educated they are, whether they're useful or not. But that population has a tiny strata that are very smart. As you know, they go to the engineering schools, engineering technologies, then they end up in Western institutions in the science and technologies, ITs. Many of them are in Silicon Valley. The other day, I was walking through Palo Alto, and probably about 80% of these, they even sounded like they just landed from someplace. It's really funny that even I felt uncomfortable. Why only one ethnic group here? Which is wrong to think that way, but that is probably, maybe this is their only place they can go or something. Anyway, but it may be changing. But the point is that strata of India is quite innovative, and they do produce things. They have the right circumstances, and university system in the US is the best and companies. So then you have the soft power, which is the contentious part. Culture, civilization, political system, strategy, diplomacy, all of them have challenges, but they have come a long way. Okay, I didn't mention technology, which actually is a very interesting part of status search, which is very relevant to what you guys do here. I have a whole discussion about India's nuclear aspiration, how it collided with the established powers and the role status played. India did not want to become a lower ranking state. Somehow they thought testing was, and you published an article I wrote some time back, but there's a lot more nuance about the systemic basis of India's challenge. When he was editor of Non-Proliferation Review, I used to publish at least a couple of articles under your leadership. So, and that discussion is fascinating, and how the established powers did not want another nuclear weapon state, a nuclear wannabe. And this was the number one opponent of nuclear proliferation regime. Space, which India is making massive progress, which you guys don't realize how much they are doing. They landed on the south pole of moon. And just yesterday, the US failed to land. And just before that, Japan failed to land. And the landing was picture perfect. It was just went in there. Economists call it, it's one of the most beautiful thing. It was moving slowly landed. And the Indians went crazy. You know, after the second time, first time it failed. Now there is a space vehicle roaming around the sun, studying it. They have plans to send humans to moon. They have several things going into Mars. It is a space power, maybe the fourth largest space power today. And it is sending hundreds of satellites for all countries, very cheap, frugals launching. So this section is, again, gives India a considerable amount of status in one domain, but not quite appreciated well, except if you read Economist or BBC News. And the other technology is IT, pharma. I'm not going to go into all these nuances because this is another problem. It is good in certain technologies. High-tech, not high-tech, this frontier technologies. Yesteryears, nuclear space, yes, important, but they are not going to give you the applied aspect of technology they ignored. Education was one part of that, where people, well, they didn't spend enough money on proper education. So the rising power paradigm happened in the context of the BRICS and the 2008-2009 financial crisis. And then we are starting to think about these new players. And so why status is not coming to India that easily? Within the strategy diplomacy, I talk about non-alignment as another status effort to bring in more status without that soft power and diplomacy. And today it's talking about multi-alignment, more agency. And then the diaspora is another part which is growing, the largest diaspora in the world, which is a big player today in many countries, including this and Canada, and are causing problems. As you know, some of them like to separate. And then there is the effort to kill some of them, which is a status depreciator. I completed the book before that. So, well, if it happens in the United States or your allies, but if it happens in Iran or someplace, that's what is different, They don't realize that. I guess they realize that now. Okay, so what is the problem? I argue, this is my central argument, there has never been a time in history, in modern history, that India has reached the potential to become a recognized global power. Yes, there are external challenges, which I'll talk in a minute, but the number one challenge is internal, and it is this human development aspect. You look at the Human Development Index, its number is very low. In fact, it is lower than Bangladesh, all the small South Asian states except Afghanistan and Pakistan, maybe Nepal. And it is a big problem. This is confined to the northern Indian belt that is not developing rapidly. That's where the Hindutva movement is flourishing too. And their efforts are not succeeding because they're not educating properly. And this has a lot to do with the caste system, class system, bureaucratic politics, and even the so-called democratic system that we have. So it's an inclusive economic development is missing. And HDI ranking a pitiful 132 out of 191. That's 2022. Bangladesh is better. And so education spending for a long time was 2% of the GDP. 2% GDP, 1% went to higher education. That's the Indian Institute of Technologies, the upper level. 1% to everything else. Now you have a big problem with the development of this human capital. The number one asset you have is human capital, and that's not developed appropriately. Without that, how will you get international respect? That's my question in the book. Of course, everybody knows this book. Hopefully somebody will read my book. So, now, it is not a developmental state because it has great difficulty of, and it has a lot of these affirmative action type programs, but that only goes to a tiny fraction of the lower caste, especially the people who never made it to the top. So, and then coupled with that is increasing, growing intolerance today. And that won't be popular in India, what I'm saying, but religious nationalism, the nationalists think they are doing this for India's status and power. But the rest of the world, especially the liberal world, has great difficulty accepting that, and they don't quite understand. But they somehow think that if you become a powerful, materially powerful state, there's no choice, others have to accept it. And that is a big problem when you have a different conception of what status and power means. But still, there are quite a few achievements. And these achievements in that are constraints at international level, because status is an international problem. And here I think I will start with the latecomer problem. It missed the boat in 1945 when the international order last time was settled in San Francisco, before that Potsdam and places like that. So although it had 2.5 million soldiers in the British Indian Army fighting, in fact, the first army to defeat Japan was Indian Army in the Northeast India and then Burma theater. And the British did not give it a role at the UN, partly because it's an argument that I'm making. They were pissed off by the movement that Gandhi started called Quit India Movement, 1942, right in the middle of the bombardment of London, Hitler's attack. But that apart, there were efforts even from the US, some efforts to put India as a P5, one of the permanent members. The British steadfastly apparently opposed it because it's still a colony, it's Britain's control. There were representatives from India. They were about to give independence 2 years later. So this aspect is not properly studied. And this is worth a research, a book about it. And I guess some of my colleagues may do that. So So you miss the boat. Once you miss the boat, international institutions rarely change. They are part of global power politics, usually after a war. And 1919, 1815, this is when institutions were created, but that didn't help. And then, of course, you have the Nuclear Proliferation Treaty come into power in 1968 and 70. It was supposed to, any country that tested before 1967 would be considered as a nuclear weapons state. Others are not. India had some capabilities to test, but they didn't for whatever reasons. So they missed the boat again to be in that club. This is what bothered India a whole host, that you create now two-class systems, we will never be in it. And great power status is tied to this nuclear status, which you can question now, of course, after the NPT and all. Today, it's not clear whether holding nuclear weapons will get you anywhere in status considerations. So then you have China as a primary challenger. And this I will discuss a little bit more. How are we doing time-wise? You're good? Yeah. Okay. Yeah, so that's very good. But the US has started to look at it more favorably, partly the China factor. And India has also become a lot more active in soft balancing, hard balancing, creating institutions, engaging with China and joining with China. In the Indo-Pacific now, it shouldn't be Asia-Pacific, Indo-Pacific. And the term Indo-Pacific itself is a victory for India, by the way, because they never used to call this. Before colonial periods, it was Indo-Pacific. Indian Ocean Pacific were so tight. But during the Cold War, it became Asia-Pacific. And so now, US Navy has changed its designation. Japan is the one pusher for this. And of course, China's behavior is spreading its capacities across the Indo-Pacific. In any case, this gives India a central position in the, if you look at the map, in the Indian Ocean sphere. So it has received partial accommodation from the United States, which is a big deal. We look at very rarely the US accommodated. Before that, of course, China. But that was a holistic, big accommodation. But this accommodation was psychological. In fact, I met Manmohan Singh, the Prime Minister, in his residence. And I asked him, why did you sign that agreement? And he said, to remove us from nuclear apartheid. So not the nuclear benefits you get, the reactors or whatever. No, it was, we needed to get out of this apartheid system, and this was the only way. My colleagues did not understand it, the communists did not understand this, tried to sabotage it. But without getting out, we wouldn't be having a good relationship with anybody, because we will be treated as an outcast in the international system. And so that was a big deal. I have in the book, my quote is, I haven't asked for his permission, but I guess it's really just a very quote. So they have become an important player. There are quite a few institutional things going on, quadrilateral alignment between US, Japan, India, and Australia. They have annual exercises. There is India-Japan relations were very bad at the period. Now it is quite intense. India is spreading its wings to Central Asia, to Middle East, to Israel. It's a big challenge. You have all of ASEAN, Korea. All of relationships have improved for India. So, but the status challenge from China, it needs to be discussed, which is, I think, is a big challenge. It will remain a big problem because potentially, if China was willing to accept India, India would have gotten a P5 Security Council membership. Right now, it's only China that opposes among the P5. There are some regional states that opposes India. So that is a big part. There are a lot of problems with respect to this. In particular, since the communists came to power, they have little interest in Hinduism or religions or whatever. In fact, a lot of quotations of Mao and Henry Kissinger about what a bold Indian philosophy is during the 1969 discussion. It's worth reading very personal antagonism with Mrs. Gandhi at that period. And then you have sinologists. This is my I want to put it here because I don't know any sinologist sitting here. Hardly any sinologists recognize India. I was a student of Rick Baum, you may remember. He had this thick book on China, foreign policy. There was not a single article dealing with India. I didn't bother to ask him, but this is the mentality of sinology that taken China's position about India as a lower ranking status. So don't bother to deal with that, which is something needs understanding why sinologists have such difficulty, barring one or two who deal with the India-China conflict. Anyway, that's just that apart. The historical dimension is the big part of it. The 62 war, which India lost massively. In fact, it was the US that was about to rescue India, but then China pulled out, which was a big humiliation for Nehru. And then that border has been a tense border, the line of actual control, they call it. And then, of course, that border was peaceful for a period of time. Now it has again come back to active crisis mode, especially after Xi Jinping came to power. And then China's relationship with Pakistan. So Pakistan is a co-challenger for India, and China-Pakistan ties have been a challenge in that sense, not just security, but it's also status. 62 is still haunting India. It is something that India cannot get over because it was not something expected, and China smashed the Indian border forces. And the material deficiencies, yes, the Chinese have, actually when China and India started, their per capita income was $300, same. India was more advanced in 1949, some areas, well, in a relative sense. So, but today, China is a quasi-developed country. As we know, there's problems. It has put a lot of emphasis on development and urban planning. A number of indicators make China, and the claim that by 2039 or so, China will be a developed country, which now is under doubt. But on any marker, China is about 3 times larger than India. Economy is probably much more. So there are a number of things the Indians find difficult and why it has trouble reaching that level. But China's big problem is within the Indo-Pacific. This is one state that can really balance China, along with United States, Japan, and maybe some ASEAN countries. It's a swing state, and China is pushing partly to pressure India not to join any military alliances. Well, India has its own interest not to. So this is the big problem for China. China's position will be much bigger if there is no India in picture. And that is part of the challenge. And therefore, it will never accept India, at least as far as we know. And these advantages that India holding make China's rapid becoming the #1 very difficult. Of course, there are a lot of other reasons. And now the navies of India and the others, if they form a powerful deterrent. And then, of course, China has managed to enter South Asia as a very big player. Actually, there's a big thing going on with Maldives. I don't know if anybody reads these things, but Maldives just elected a leader who declared that we are not interested in India anymore. He's going to China first, although India gives a lot of support to them. And this is the case with all of these small states in South Asia. Bangladesh, this election, Nepal, Sri Lanka, all of them are using this India-China rivalry for gaining more advantages. And they are getting it. China is giving more, India is giving. China was not a player at all. It was an Indo-centric region for so long. But now China is a big player, which means India has to co-share its status ambitions in the region. Still, it is part of the Chinese institutions too, but it's a very interesting relationship. I have written about this subject. Territorial conflict has picked up. You have a problem, salami slicing strategy. You had two big crises, Doklam, Ladakh, the last one produced some 20 casualties after a long time. These are Himalayan areas, very difficult to protect. So, but both India and China started the big push for infrastructure development and bringing in population from various parts. So India is also doing infrastructure, not to the level, but reasonably good. So it won't be a takeover, walkover as in 62 if there is a war. So now we also have two ambitious leaders, Xi Jinping and Modi. Before that, Deng and all were a lot more engaging India. And Modi initially tried to please Xi, but now they don't even meet, which is interesting. So escalation of this conflict is possible. And that is where the border is now not as bad as the India-Pakistan border, which is really militarized, heavily militarized. But the militarization was less on this border, which is very long, to almost 3,000 plus miles. Difficult to protect, many places nobody lives. So you have the small states. Bhutan was one of India's protectorate. China is even entering there. There's going to be a separate deal, it seems. So they have a territorial dispute too. So China may end up signing an agreement, then that will cause India problems. Anyway, so co-sharing is going to happen. But is China willing, or China will needle India? A lot depends on international politics of the day. Briefly, regional constraints, big part is Pakistan. This is another story that has not been written properly. The India-Pakistan conflict is not just about territory or identity, it's about status. This is the Hindu-Muslim conflict. The Muslims were rulers of South Asia for about 800 years. And they thought, Muhammad Ali Jinnah thought they're co-equals. And they were able to form alliance with the United States and others. The Western countries created a parity in status terms. And that really was a big story of the Cold War and the conflict, nuclear testing and all connected to that. Then after the end of the Cold War and after the Afghan crisis ended, their economy is in deep trouble. There is no hope for Pakistan in achieving anything similar to India. So that nobody is treating them in that status parity as they used to. This is a big achievement for India, but Pakistani elite has not changed their understanding of this thing. They still crave for equal status, which is not easy if your material markers are not there. So then, of course, I already mentioned India is trying to transcend South Asia, knowing that these small states are not going to accept. It's not enough to have any status gain, although in your immediate region, you're supposed to gain status. So transcending, going to look east, something called Act East under Modi. Modi has been very active in the Persian Gulf, the UAEs and other countries, Saudi Arabia, and there are a lot of things happening in those territories. So let me sort of conclude. It is getting there much rapidly the last 2 decades. It is indeed a quasi-great power. We want to call it subaltern great power or whatever. There is no other rising power with this potential. This is something I have to recognize. The closest is Brazil, 200 million people, economy is not growing sufficiently, no ambition enough, and it is in a geopolitically not that important. I mean, again, I don't want to make a value judgment. I like Brazil. It is in a place where it doesn't matter. It's not Indo-Pacific. So, who else? Indonesia? No, they're not interested. So, India is the great power in the making. And if the economy grows even 6%, 5%, it has to reach some level. There is no point in saying that it will not. Of course, it will be a messy situation. So, raw indicators, place it in a place that will have a much better position. But will it be recognized as a great power? If not, what are the problems? The status discrepancy, as we know, generates violence and conflict. And in this case, because of nuclear deterrence and all, you cannot externalize too much. And you have very powerful Pakistan and China challenging that. So my fear is more internal repression can happen. as happened in Japan, Germany, and all these rising powers. Rising power phenomenon is, the status phenomenon is not just external violence, it's internal violence towards anybody who looks like is not going to accept your status, who is an impediment to getting to that higher level. So, and then he used that as a propaganda, as the Nazis are the extreme example. So, I think India-US relations are very pivotal. US has a very important role to play here. How and when India will be accepted. That relationship goes through ups and downs, but there are tremendous improvement in sharing information today, the intelligence level, military, naval cooperation, etc. So my final argument is that it will achieve by default for a bit. And if the world order is multiplex with many countries with agency, which is something that the debate about multipolar versus multiplex is something Amrita Acharya has it. Multiplex does not assume that it's just 5 powers or whatever. It will be different power holders. And the world order will definitely give India a big role. The question is it willing to play the role? What kind of normative order it wants? A lot of propaganda style cliche came out. Just the recent meeting, G20. There were some achievements for Modi, but the problem is outward projection versus what exactly they will achieve. Global South is the latest, trying to become leaders of Global South again. So a lot of it is questionable because many in the Global South are not very sympathetic to the particular political order Modi is creating. So what is the attraction? But anyway, I will stop there. The book has a lot of insights and anecdotes, my travels around the world, some meetings. Hopefully you guys will find it useful. It's available very soon, but it's on Amazon and all right now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, TV. It's really great to see you again and to kind of remember the old days and Los Angeles. And it's me very proud to see how you picked up that extraordinary scholar to recognize this international. I have kind of 4 points. You can choose to respond as you wish to them. One, I'm struck. I think this is about the only seminar that I've attended in the last 2 years. I don't even think I heard the word Russia mentioned. Sometimes, in some respects, pleasing, but it also kind of leads to the question when you're looking at kind of global status. Why the failure to make reference to Russia, which has a long and I would say continuing generally positive relationship with India. So I'm kind of curious if this was a conscious omission or whatever reason you chose not to make reference to Russia. Secondly, I'm kind of curious about how India perceives the very significant expansion in Chinese nuclear capabilities. There's a big debate about the extent to which there is more continuity or change in Chinese nuclear policy, and the extent to which India sees itself as in any way responsible for the growth of Chinese nuclear capability to build the response, whether it just sees it as something that relates to Sino-American relations. Thirdly, if you have time, it would be interesting for you to comment a little bit about what at least the press describes as an Indian tilt toward Israel during the recent war in the Middle East. And lastly, if you have a chance, you talked about IT, but you did. I don't think you said anything about artificial intelligence, yeah. And there are those who really regard this as a transformative issue. I would say the majority of them with whom I'm familiar basically see it as a two-way race with the United States and China. And some have suggested that really, if you're going to catapult yourself into the frontier, that it will have to be with a very, very significant investment in AI. And some countries have an advantage in that area more so than others. So I'm kind of curious whether you also see this as part and parcel of India's economic plans for the future. So, stop there.
Should I answer?
Please,
Yeah, great questions. In fact, I have a small section in the book on Russia. Russia was the only great power that recognized India as a power of significance in the Cold War period. And the reason why India-Russia relationship has been so close, of course, there are balance of power reasons, but it was, they treated India as an important player during the Cold War period, as a key state in their idea of the correlation of forces or whatever in the developing world. And the visit of Indian leaders to Moscow was national festival kind of thing. Whereas a visit of Indian leaders to Washington was what? Somebody go to the airport and was
Forgot.
some undersecretary or whatever. And then he's taken to the White House. And same was the visit of, I remember as a journalist in India, the visit of Gorbachev. My God, Delhi streets were full of, this was a holiday, a big deal. There was a psychological relationship. Yes, with the end of the Cold War, it sort of lost it. And I think they're still holding on to some remnants to it. But there is, of course, China's, so I kind of treat it as Russia is granted. It will be there for India up to a point. As long as India doesn't form an alliance with the US, and as long as China, Russia don't become an alliance, neither is possible in my view. China, Russia is not going to form an alliance because the territory they want to have control over are both covered Central Asia to whatnot. But there may be a lot more coordination happening. So they are using right now more, the Indian foreign minister visited Moscow. Part of it is, I understand, is to show to the West that we have possibilities. Don't take us for like it's about that killing thing, as well as President Biden not accepting the Republic Day visit invitation. But anyway, so it is an important relationship, but what is new in it, other than weapons, they still buy some, but it has played a role. I have a section in the book, in fact, a section on all the other major powers, small sections. So yeah, I should actually include it in my presentation next time, but I try to reduce the number. Expansion of Chinese, I don't know, maybe you can help me. I haven't seen a single article within the Indian media or anything talking about China's expansion of nuclear weapons. They think it's all towards the United States. Chinese have enough limited IRBMs and aircraft base or whatever to attack all of Indian cities. So what does it matter if they have a few more ICBMs, or any other expansion? So they are also developing the missile defenses somewhat. And so this is actually an interesting question, Bill. I don't know if you guys have done work on it. Why the rest of Asia Pacific doesn't seem to bother that much about the Chinese nuclear buildup per se. I haven't come across anything, and it remains a puzzle. And I think it is maybe they want to ignore it because they cannot compete with China. They don't have enough materials to produce. And the competition has to be the ICBMs that can hit all parts of China, which, by the way, they're developing certain ICBM capabilities. But ICBM also will put you in a bad book of United States or other Western countries. So there are constraints on India to that matter. But my reading is their nuclear capability is even lower than Pakistan today. There is a tendency to play down this as weapon that may not play a big role in the next conflict. And that deterrence only as the last resort kind of thing. So that is itself is interesting why even Pakistan is catching up bigger than India. I must admit that I haven't done much work on that part. India-Israel, fascinating case. It started off with the end of the Cold War. Even the Congress leaders were willing to accept But they were also a lot more sympathetic to the Palestinian cause than this guy, Modi government is. The Modi government, as you know, is anti-Muslim. Let me put it that way. And they find Islamic terrorism, or they call it, all those problematic. And Israel has found a great ally in India for its technology, for its weapons, for intelligence sharing. And several 100,000 Israeli soldiers, by the way, they come for a year to some ashrams in Northeast India or in the Himalayas, enjoy peace and quiet. They have a big relationship with India today, fascinating. Direct flights now. So even in this recent conflict, ongoing conflict, only after a tremendous pressure, Modi has said anything about Palestinian suffering. It's not what India used to say. So there is a lot of thing going on there. India relies on Israel to gain certain weapons, especially weapons that are usable in limited conflicts, artillery pieces, etc. And there is support for anti-terrorism or insurgency, a lot of things. So even this conflict is, of course, the Indian media is a lot more critical of some of them, of the Modi's position on it. They are not surprising that it is a great conduit to United States as well. Some weapons and others, the other US cannot directly transfer, but maybe to Israel. So there's a lot more going on there, but I think this religious aspect is very interesting. ITA, extremely good question. I have a small section and I could not find a good section discussion on why India has not put effort into AI. My hunch is they somehow think others will develop, and when they need more big numbers, they will come here. And then if you put this thing, the labor market will suffer. There's a lot of political problem with AI, as we know, that you don't need a, once you start deploying them, then the political challenge of labor market, the cheap labor that India is hounding on. So my reading is that the fear of, if you publicly announce too much AI, there will be political opposition, as happened for computerization in the 90s. I remember very much, there was a lot of protests all over India, labor unions, don't bring computers and take away our human jobs. But now the cell phones, the big oppositions, but now the number one users are the poor, the cell phones. So is this kind of the world's industrial belt try to use the multinationals who will come and produce it? But my reading is there may be more happening there than we all know. There are definitely military level AI work going on. There is certain areas they are developing, and jointly with other companies and countries. So again, a fascinating question. In fact, if they don't develop it, you still, this could be the next industrial revolution. I absolutely agree with you that if a countries that will have the upper hand can control the world order, as Navy was for the European powers. So when you go to Delhi, you ask them, what is happening? Maybe he can answer a bit more. Thank you so much. Good questions.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Let me just, before I open it up further, let me just quickly respond, since you nudged me on this point, on the China aspect, to your point also. Yeah, I mean, I'll second the point that there isn't all that much analysis that I'm seeing also about India's responses to China's nuclear expansion. And this is a question that kept coming up when I was teaching my nuclear weapons in South Asia, of course, last semester. My own thinking on this is that given, since at least 2017, we've seen repeated border crises between India and China. But the Indian response has primarily been on trying to bolster its conventional military capabilities, in part on its own, and secondly, through its partnership with the United States. You know, slowly we see information that comes out, you know, in interviews, etc., which show that there was some real-time intelligence sharing cooperation while the June 2020 crisis was going on. So my own impression is that the Indian focus has been really on conventional deterrence, deterrence by denial, with respect to the border crises with China, which is why I think the nuclear aspect is just doesn't play a role in this.
I think it's also usability.
Right.
How do you threaten nuclear weapons for these little incursions undemarcated border? But Pakistan is, on the other hand, is a very different story. They have deployed those mini nukes as they came, which I doubt capacity. But the point is, they are using nuclear weapons to deter escalation on the border. Whereas India is not looking at that.
And you don't have an Indian equivalent of Pakistan's policy of full spectrum deterrence, which is deterrence at lower levels through battlefield nuclear weapons. Let me open this up to questions, comments, including from colleagues who are present virtually. If you can just identify yourselves and then ask your question, David, please.
Thank you so much for your lecture and your talk. It's all very interesting. My name is Ariel. I'm a student here in the NPTS program. And my question has to do with one of your last comments about how when perhaps an aspiring power hasn't been very successful in achieving greater degrees of status internationally, the leadership will turn internally and try and solve questions of internal status by maybe persecuting a certain section of the population that they view as in the way of achieving greater status. And I guess my question is, I'm wondering whether this resulting internal effort that is often violent, will that just lead to this vicious cycle of never achieving greater international status, because then other members of the international community will realize, oh, now there's this internal violence that's going on, and that will also decrease status? Or do you think, in your view, will this kind of result in a more homogenized or nationalistic sentiment internally that will then bolster up efforts to increase status?
Yeah, this is where geopolitics and balance of power all become very important. Unfortunately, the history of rising powers or great powers, repression, and correlating that with greater international. Stalin, I mean, Bill probably knows much better than I do. I mean, as any Ukrainian, what they did to Ukraine and the millions who perished in the gulags. China, repression in Xinjiang, Uyghur community, Tibet, whatnot. So it depends. If you're a very important player, you're needed. I mean, look at Saudi Arabia. I mean, what that guy has done is still, he's now slowly getting accepted. Short-term cost apart, unfortunately, geopolitics trumps sometimes. And the United States is also a player in these sort of calculations. Pakistan, which under Ziaul did a lot of things, the US was treating it as an ally. So this is a problem. But today, if you claim that your greater status depends on your democracy, your tolerance, your civilization, your inclusivity, and then you do this thing, that's when people start laughing at you. Whereas the Chinese don't say that. I mean, you either become us or, So Modi has to come out and say, well, I don't care, as long as you are opposing my plan, I will destroy you. But that's not what they're doing. They're saying we are still a great experiment in democracy. But our status in the Freedom House number is now very low, I mean, very high in the illiberal democracy range. But the US also was there, but now slightly better, but may get there closer to India very soon. If the election was the way it's being predicted. But anyway, I'm not saying any prediction. So that is a big question. Who the audience is. If you are a liberal-minded, educated at schools like this, and nicely understood the world, but the average person coming out of technical institutions world is not understanding this. I have friends, Indian techie type friends, engaging them is painful on this subject because they think that India has a right and there's no problem if you are a nationalist. Repressing people or democracy is not that critical. So that the education of liberal education is missing. And this goes to the US, the 30% who think Trump is the man, so there is that problem of liberal education that is going on. And India is a good example of this process happening slowly. The Hindutvaization of India. And in next election, he may win 2/3, if he wins 2/3. And the constitution would be changed into a Hindu republic. And that is like a Hindu Pakistan. So there's a lot of problems, but if you are an open-minded person and looked at India as this great experiment in democracy, then you will have a problem. But will that result in policies when you need India for countering China or Indian Ocean conflict zones? It's a big question. Or the market, whether without the Indian market, where are you going to sell? The next selling is all in India. So it's partly India. It's a big question mark.
Reminds me of this phrase that is often used in domestic politics in India. I haven't quite seen it in the United States, which is the TINA factor.
Which one?
The TINA factor.
TINA?
TINA, which is there is no alternative. And so I'm wondering if this applies on the international level as of now also, whether the international community perceives that there is no other alternative in the Indo-Pacific region. So you deal with whatever's going on internally.
There's no alternative to Modi. That's another big issue. Within India, they think there's no leader who can compete with it.
Other question, please, Glenn.
TV, great talk, a really interesting subject, and I think your book is incredibly timely as well. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm Glenn Robinson. TV knows me.
Yeah.
And
We've been colleagues.
now a fellow here at the Center for Terrorism, Extremism, and Counterterrorism. So the questions I have, I have two, and you really touched on the first one, and that is, and they're both related to this idea of India as a rising great power, but its political class dominated by ethno-nationalist ideas, the BJP in particular, and sort of the echoes of the RSS. Today. And so the first question is sort of looking forward is, what does this mean for Indian democracy? And you started to touch on that as well. And I think of other countries, when you said, Modi just essentially at some point would just need to say, I don't care about the democracy. It's about Hindu power, Indian power. And it reminds me kind of what's been happening in Israel in recent months, where the Netanyahu government, at least elements of it, basically said, we don't really care that much about democracy. It's Jewish power that is the most important thing. So a little bit kind of on how this combination of rising status and ethno-nationalist leadership plays out democratically in India, 20 years from now. And then related to that, how does that combination impact this club of sort of right-wing, I think like a comparativist, not an IR theorist, so forgive me. But how does it impact this club of sort of right-wing populist countries in the world, Russia, Hungary, Turkey, Egypt, Israel, elsewhere, that can then point to India and say, look, it's because India was true to their true ethno-national status, in other words, true to Hindu power. That's what gave them the power that we see today. Do we see that kind of international demonstration factor? Do you expect to see it? And so India represents not a great hope for a global South emerging democracy, but a great hope for global South emerging right-wing populism and that influence on other places, especially in Asia.
I can answer the second part. Is the Turkey it doesn't like India. Turkish leader is the cause of the current Maldives crisis. There's an Islamist government came in Maldives that's very close to Turkey. We're saying don't deal with India anymore. So there is no possibility. Modi and Erdogan don't get along. They have a big challenge. That is religious problem because they are also very sympathetic to Kashmir and Pakistan. So there is no right-wing developing country club emerging. because then you need, or China is going to be part of it. So still the world is divided in geopolitical balance of power context. You cannot see that combination. There is little possibility. But this first question is very connected to this, the idea of where Indian democracy will go. India's problem is this. If you look at India, in the southern states of India, BJP is not very powerful. Only in Karnataka state where they won some election. Kerala, there is no chance. Tamil Nadu, there is no chance. Andhra Pradesh, and quite a host of states, they are not an important state. The North Indian states are where their stronghold and where the population is increasing, higher level of poverty, illiteracy, and Hindu nationalism is coming. Because the South Indian Hinduism itself is not exactly what these guys are talking about. They're different gods and different belief systems. And so one problem that's going to happen is India is going to have what they call it delimitation. In your system, in our system here, you have constituencies change as population, the size and all that. The Indian Parliament will have another 200 members within, if they start implementing it. They've been postponing it. And where will the members come from? Because south the population is decreasing. So Kerala now has 20 MPs. They will have 15. Uttar Pradesh has 200 MPs. I don't know exact number. 180 something.
And it's what, I think 80 odd.
No, more than that. Well, anyway, we can check. That number will double if the population goes by the population. And these guys will have rule over India. So, I don't know the population actually. So, population size of Uttar Pradesh is similar to Indonesia or larger. If it is an independent country, it would be the 5th or 6th largest country in the world. So, this problem of internal bifurcation is very likely to come. And segments of India does not like this idea of Hindu nationalism. So this is the hope that somehow there will be coalitions and they will lose this game because they are claiming a lot of development, which they are actually achieving some infrastructure development. And that Modi's successors may not have the same capacity to control. So India has this history of, Indira Gandhi tried this in 1975. He or she had an emergency, then people threw them out. But the problem is there is not a powerful opponent yet in the opposition side. Rahul Gandhi, the grandson of Nehru and all, they are not strong enough fighting this guy. He's very good at speaking Hindi, vernacular. He looks like a yogi, like one of these religious. He's not married. He's everything that people look up to. A lot of things working for him. So, crafty politician. That craftiness is something that others don't have a capacity. So, democracy is already undercut because they have curtailed the freedoms of. There are a lot of cases against opposition leaders. This freedom of. If I'm speaking the same thing in India, it could be a problem. That kind of speaking capacity. There's a lot of restrictions. Still, there is a powerful minority press there, small press, questioning everything. And then occasionally they go to the Supreme Court, they get some rulings. A lot of things are not that easy to impose to make it a totally undemocratic state. So the hope is this cycle they have control may fail at some point, and maybe the opposition will create a better system to survive because they are under threat, the opposition itself. A lot of things that may happen. So people haven't yet given up on democracy in India. It's probably a phase, a cyclical phase. But it will go through a lot of turmoil internally if there is even look at Israel, you said the Jewish power. I mean, what percentage Jews want that state that the current leader wants? I think that's a minority. Somehow,
50-50.
Yeah, this is most likely to happen in India because large number of Hindus are not believers of this idea. They are very much for just like secular people, they like freedom. And Hindus as a inviting culture, it's a very interesting philosophy in that way. So, but people are converting, which is what happens to populism and the power of authoritarian leaders. I mean, this statement that you only needed to listen Hitler for 3 minutes to convert, for a German who felt they're humiliated at every point. So that is happening slowly, which is what, because the counter arguments are there. There is also a international media that is attacking. So we will see in that context where it is going to go.
Thank you.
Other questions? Lauren, I wonder if there's anyone online.
None so far raising their hand.
Please, actually,
You first, please. Thank you so much, Dr. Paul. My name is Shai. I'm a student at Middlebury College. I'm interning here at the CS office for this JTAM. And I think in your latter comment about the acquisition of great power status by India, how that's going to be mostly determined by external recognition. And so you sort of said that they might get there by default by their sort of threshold capacity. But given the rising trends of unemployment and rising trends of poverty and sort of couple that with the lack of spending in education, especially with all the belts, do you think there is a claim to be made that electorally, because people have been sort of prioritizing this acquisition of great power over the development of their asset human capital, do you think there's a claim to be made that we are running a potential risk of deteriorating that human capital, which seems to be the pillar for that threshold marker in the first place?
Well, that's part of my argument that the human capital is not advancing as rapidly as it should be, but it is advancing. A segment of the population is joining the middle class. So right now, the absolute poverty is about maybe less than 20%. So that is because, when GDP grows, there is some trickling down. It doesn't mean it's getting, and there are programs to avoid mass starvation, things like that. But what I am arguing is that without that full development, or at least a large segment of India's full potential will never be realized. That's sort of because demographic dividend is your number one asset, and that is not developed sufficiently. But they are putting more money. I mean, although I said 2%, now it's 4% of GDP. There are lots of programs, but there is a big youth unemployment. So, but you look at the overall growth of the country, which is quite impressive. I don't know where there's a market growing, it's 6-7%, this huge country growing without much disruption during the COVID, but now it's coming back. It's the number one growth story. That's because there is a lot of markets there, internal markets. So number of things have happened that potentially offset this problem. But by the way, no country in the world became great power after solving all their domestic problems. I mean, you can say the same thing about the United States. They spend a little time in San Francisco. I mean, how can this be a great power? Some segments of it, but it is a great power. Some areas of it looks like really great power. It is impressive what they have built over these years. So a highly unequal society, and it has yes, the US has that, but the percentage is higher. This inequality problem is structural, it's caste driven. The lowest caste cannot get there easily. But it is changing. Infrastructure is changing rapidly. India's roads, even railway, now they've started building these fast trains. Quite a few have been introduced. Airports. In fact, the picture you just saw is Mumbai airport entrance. Any airport, no airport in Asia Pacific other than Singapore can compete with that. It won an award for best airport. And where is it situated? Inside a slum in Mumbai. Well, the biggest slum in the world is Dharavi. Just when you land, you will see the slum. But within the airport, the best lounge ever possible. The food is really great. All these things make the appearance and India's hospitality industry, hotels, all these places give the impression of a very rapidly developing country. except when you go to the slums and certain portions of it. So the Northeast, the South, many parts of South is quite advanced. And so it's a matter of how you put it. But this country has a big problem. Poverty is in its face. When you go there, you see it. Sleepless people or people on the, that is less in many other countries. But then the second thing is, if you already arrived as a great power in Russia, by the way, the average male Russian lives less than average Indian. So there are a lot of things that are comparable to many parts, but look-wise is difficult. But the argument is that Modi, if continues, can probably bring a lot more prosperity to the people. That's what he's selling quite well. And there are some things he has done. Clean India is one of his policies. That's very successful up to a point in providing toilets and things like that. Anyway, good question. Yeah.
Did you have a question, sir? I can ask.
Yeah, I mean, I thought I saw your hand.
Please introduce.
My name is Najm. I'm a Middlebury alum. I'm just
He also teaches at the Monterey Peninsula College. He's very humble.
I'm just wondering, the Indo-China relationship improves.
What?
What if the relation between India and China improves? And I'm very interested in looking at trade statistics, and it always shows a different kind of picture than but in case of Russia, it didn't work. So I had a very serious kind of.
So actually, you have a point that despite all these tensions, India's trade relationship with China is growing. In fact, India imports more from China than China does. By the way, it's not a equal, huge balance. The reason is that many products that India makes needs the Chinese parts, even pharmaceuticals, machine tools. Without that, the companies cannot manufacture, because manufacturing is costly in India than China. And China has purposely decided to keep this very little things they import from India. And so the number is growing, but there is a lot of problem with that. Whether India-China relations improve, that will be a geopolitical major, like a rapprochement, as happened in China-US relationship. The only condition would be that the West turns against India, and that India has nowhere to go. But I don't see China, I mean, the problem of status, China does not want to recognize India as a co-equal. That's the problem. That's whether China will change that under a new elite. There's a lot of historical reasons for that. The Chinese communists hated the impact of Buddhism in India. They didn't like Buddhism. There's Mao Zedong has all his writings. And the Chinese thought they are the Middle Empire. The whole idea of Indo-China or Southeast Asia as a hybrid civilization. India plays a big role there in Southeast Asia. China doesn't want to recognize that. In fact, it is historical that India has influenced China and Southeast Asia more than vice versa. Because Buddhism went to China, there's nothing came back except a few things here and there. Southeast Asia, look at Thailand, look at Indonesia. What's the language? Sanskrit. Thailand's everything is so influenced by Sanskrit. Sanskrit was the Latin or Greek of the day, Chinese influence is there, I'm not saying that. Indonesia, the names of people, you go to Jakarta and their museum, it's basically Indian, all the religious artifacts there. So that recognition has been limited on China's part. The long period of time, it is mutual negligence, not interacting much. Before that, though, medieval times, yes, Indian universities, Nalanda and Takshashila, where Chinese came and studied and took ideas from India and spread Buddhism to China. I think it will be a geopolitical major change. I don't see that happening because China wants to be numero uno, replace the United States. Its focal point is United States, not India. And some, I don't call it racial, but cultural reasons. They don't think India is an equal, Indians are equal people or society, culture. They are, the middle kingdom. So if all that will change, maybe, I don't know. I'm very skeptical of it. And India does not want to play a second fiddle to China in any manner, which is another interesting.
Jeff, you have the last word.
I think I'm gonna pass, given where we're on the clock. I'll have some more time for TV later.
Great. Thank you so much. This was really insightful, lots of points. I had a whole bunch of questions, which I'll
You can write an
send you.
article book on many of this.
Yeah, absolutely, especially dealing with the whole idea of strategic autonomy. But I will, before I forget, I'll just second what Professor Najam said, that about this, about India-China economic relations. Just a couple of days ago, there was an interesting piece in in one of the Indian papers about how the Indian government is trying to make it easier for technical experts from China, especially working in the manufacturing sector, to come to India. Removing some visa requirements, that sort of thing. I thought that was really emblematic of this close interdependence, which often gets ignored with the border crises and other skirmishes.
Which is actually an anomaly. Interdependence should produce less conflict, but here it is not economic interdependence is not affecting military conflict.
That's a journal article right there.
All the military conflict is not affecting.
Right. Vice versa.
So
Mutually exclusive.
chicken or egg problem.
Right. On that point, thank you so much, Dr.
you.
Paul.
A lot of fun.
Please join me in. Thank you.